Hello, everyone, and welcome to Museum Moments. I am Dr. Dan Humschild, the Director of Education, and if you will excuse my mild laryngitis, I'd like to share with you a story about the legend Tommy Kono. Now, maybe you've never heard of Tommy Kono before. He's not necessarily a household name, but after what you're about to hear, perhaps he'll become a household name for you. Because Tommy Kono is still to date probably the greatest weightlifter in US history. In 1952 and 1956, he won Olympic gold medals. And in 1960, he won an Olympic silver medal. Still in the history of Olympic weightlifting, he's the first person to medal at 3 separate Olympic Games in 3 separate weight classes. And he's still the only person to ever set world records in 4 different weight classes throughout his career. In fact, from the beginning to the end, he ultimately set 26 world records and 7 Olympic records. He's a truly remarkable athlete and was listed as one of the 100 greatest Olympic athletes of all time. But how did Tommy Kono, this American man, rise to prominence in the 1950s? That's a story that actually connects to what we're doing at the Jewish Museum Milwaukee right now. As many of you know, our current exhibit is called Then They Came for Me, the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II and the demise of civil liberties. And Tommy Kono's story dovetails, intersects with the story that we tell in this special exhibit, which is why his story is relevant to our work at the Jewish Museum Milwaukee. So now that you know these stats about Tommy Kono, I want to go back to the beginning, to where he was born, how he was raised, and his time being incarcerated during this era of American history, to unfurl a little bit more about that story and reveal something about the resiliency of his spirit that hopefully you can take with you today. I'm going to share with you a wonderful piece that has been created by Google in their arts and culture program called Indomitable, the Tommy Kono story. And there'll be a link to this also below the video that you're watching right now. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I think what you'll see is quite remarkable, and you'll have a sense of who this person was. So Tommy Kono was born in 1930 in Sacramento, California. His parents were both workers at a local cannery there, and he grew up with a number of siblings. As a boy, one of the things that's interesting about him, this Olympic champion, one of the greatest Olympians of all time, is that he actually had a severe case of asthma, and he couldn't participate in sports, and he almost couldn't go to school for a long time because it was so severe. So he was kind of the smaller and the weaker brother during his early childhood. But like so many people, the Kono family were caught up in the wave of hysteria that hit the US after Pearl Harbor. And his family was shortly after Pearl Harbor was sent to Tule Lake incarceration camp in Northern California. Tule Lake is, like many of the incarceration camps, an incredibly foreboding place to live. It's not the kind of place that anybody would really want to go, right? It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. The ramshackle huts or barracks that people were kept in were not incredibly welcoming. A family had to live with 5 other families in each of these barrack homes, and they could only occupy a space no bigger than most people's living rooms. And there was no privacy or care for the general growth of human beings in these situations. The US government really put them there as a way to get them out of the scene of the West Coast, and to make sure that they did not pose any threat to the US government during World War II. Of course, they didn't pose any threat to the US government during World War II. This was just a form of racism that was being meted out in this incarceration of individuals of Japanese descent. Tommy Kono's family was sent to Tule Lake, which actually was also a maximum security prison for people who later on in 1943 and 44 would answer no and no to the loyalty questionnaires, questions 27 and 28, are those who were called no-no boys or considered delinquents within the prison camp system. So this Tule Lake was a place of more maximum security and a place that families were often removed from, but the Kono family spent most of their time there. It was actually because of the dry desert air in Tule Lake that Tommy's asthma started to actually relieve itself, and he started to actually thrive in this environment. Now, some people have said, and even the way that this is posed in this Google story, that this is something that maybe we can look at as a positive outcome of the incarceration of the Kono family. But I would caution against that narrative. Certainly, there was something positive about the influence of dry desert air in Northern California. But the fact that his family was incarcerated cannot be withdrawn from this story. So while there was this one tiny side effect that was beneficial to Tommy's story, we cannot dismiss the harm that was done to him and his family as a result of this incarceration. One thing that I think is very interesting about these situations is that the resiliency of the communities to create an environment as best as possible that was accommodating to their needs and desires. For example, at Tule Lake, there was a judo club, and Tommy's mother made him a gi while he was in camp. And so he actually was able to start participating in the martial arts while he was at Tule Lake. One of the interesting things about this club is that it actually formed alongside many other clubs. There's a lot of infamous or famous stories about baseball being a major part of camp life. But this is yet another sort of social and active endeavor that was created entirely by people who were imprisoned. So I think that this is a really remarkable element to keep in mind when we think about the history of Japanese incarceration, is that while those individuals who were put in these situations were, of course, victimized by the US government, they did not approach the situation with a victim mentality, right? They approached the situation with a great deal of resilience and passion for continuing on to provide as many opportunities as they possibly could for their community and for their children, even in these dire circumstances. This here is an image of the kind of circumstance that we're talking about. This is a contemporary image of the Tule Lake site. As you can see, very little remains of the old camp. We have done a good job as an American society of trying to bury the past, right? Thanks to people like the second generation and third generation, and to the sponsorship of people like the Ibuki Family Foundation and the creation of this exhibit, we are now resurrecting these stories, right? But when we look at the way that Tule Lake has been treated in the time since these incarceration camps existed, we can see that there's not a great premium set on remembering the past. But after returning from camp, Tommy Kono had this swell of enthusiasm for fitness. He said at one point that he didn't start weightlifting to become an Olympic champion. He started weightlifting because he wanted to improve his life. And he actually used weightlifting and judo and these other activities that he got into while at camp as a way of just sort of progressing through his high school years and continuing to feel really good about himself and continuing to give himself some sort of added incentive to participate in daily life around his high school in Sacramento. He entered his first weightlifting contest in 1948 and very, very quickly was shown to be a remarkable talent. Within a couple of years, he was winning the national weightlifting championships, in fact. And the Buddhist community in Sacramento really played a huge role in his maturation as a champion. Not only was that center a marquee place for people to store their goods and their household products and their artifacts and their mementos while they were incarcerated. It also became an epicenter for cultural life for the Japanese American community in Sacramento upon their return. And it was in the Buddhist church or assembly hall of Kaikan where Tommy Kono began doing his first competitions and his first demonstrations of his remarkable strength. This is actually the house that the Kono family lived in Sacramento in the 1950s. And it was in the basement of this house that Tommy Kono went through his regimen of weightlifting every single day. He did this with his brothers, who, as you saw in the first picture, were much older and more strapping as young men, or as young boys. But by the time they grew into young men, Tommy was, of course, a remarkable athlete who could outlift the majority of his older brothers. In the 1950s and 1951, 1952, Tommy was enlisted in the US Army during the Korean War. But the US Army saw his remarkable capacity as a weightlifter, and he was assigned to Fort Mason, which was near Oakland, which is the center of US weightlifting. So rather than going off to war, he actually was given the opportunity to train by the US government and by the US military in a kind of ironic twist of fate to go to Oakland and to be near a training facility that would provide him with all the resources that were necessary for him to thrive as a weightlifter. And then we get to the Olympic years that I've already mentioned. In 1952, he went to Helsinki and he lifted a world record 259 pounds in the snatch. And this won him a gold medal in the lightweight class. And he would go on to win gold medals again in 1956 and a silver medal in 1960. And it was through this process that he became known as one of the greatest American weightlifters of all time. After the time of his competitive years, he actually became a coach for a variety of different national teams around the world, including the Mexican national team and the US national team. He also was a representative for a variety of different sporting endeavors that ultimately were diplomatic missions, such as during the Cold War. He was the only American weightlifter to go to Russia for a competition in Moscow that he ended up winning. And it was a remarkable experience for him, and one that really helped continue the diplomatic relations during the 1960s that were so important in keeping the Cold War cold, so to speak. So with that, I'm going to leave you with this remarkable story of Tommy Kono, and I welcome you to click on some links that I'm going to put below, and again, invite you into the Jewish Museum Milwaukee to take a look at the story that we tell, and then they came for me. When you have a chance to see the pictures and see the artifacts within that exhibit, I think you'll note that anyone rising from that particular situation to become a great Olympic champion is truly a hero. And the resiliency and spirit of somebody who is capable of doing that is truly to be honored and to be recognized. So thank you so much for joining me for Museum Moments today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.